Eamon Ryan's eyes swivel. Literally, they literally swivel. They go round and round when he talks. Once he starts talking, the eyes begin to swivel. I don't know, I haven't actually looked close enough or been able to see do they go clockwise or anti-clockwise, but they do swivel. A friend of mine said to me he observed that Ryan, when he speaks, is like a Pez. Yeah, so what happened, I think it was yesterday or the day before, was a protest for climate change. I can't even do those kids from those private schools, and I won't name any of the schools, but I do know that the boys' school is a school that does compulsory charity. So, in other words, they would have the approved charity of the school, and you better support it or else. You don't have the right to opt out of it. That's how totalitarian societies work. And many of those secondary schools, particularly those boys' ones, tend to be extremely totalitarian. They don't want you to have activities outside of the school. They don't want you to have friends outside of the school. And then when you leave the school, you're one step short of a high court injunction to get them to stop fucking bothering you. There's a flat type of accent that those kind of boys have. It's not a posh accent, really. That would be more St. Columba's or a kind of a Church of Ireland ascendancy accent. It's more of a kind of a Varadkar squawk that these kids have. People have asked me to define my own accent. I don't know. But what happened to me was I started doing speech and drama very seriously from about the age of 11 up to 20. I trained as a drama teacher. And you become quite sensitive to accent, and you become quite sensitive to correct speech. And that's how I developed the voice and accent that I have. I can't say I cultivated it particularly, but that's it. How would I define my accent? I don't know. But I don't have the same accent as those kind of kids or their teachers. It's a squawk. Varadkar is a lot closer to it. I'm trying to think of somebody else. Tubridy would be somewhat closer to it. And anyway, there was these kids outside. They had a spontaneous protest in relation to climate change. And, you know, they walked out of school to do this protest down, would you believe, at Leinster House. And who came out but Eamon Ryan? Gosh. Eamon Ryan just happened to be in Leinster House. At least he wasn't asleep. He comes out and, you know, he says, we're listening to the kids, we're listening to the young uns. I forget the cliches. I mean, just the cliches people came... The ripping of the piss that happened on Twitter. Twitter is really, really good, you see. You must remember that these people are utterly batshit, crazy, psychotic. Ryan is... You know, Ryan isn't any more nuts than the rest of them. He just is even worse at hiding it than the likes of... And I'm not being charitable when I say this. The likes of Varadkar and Simon Harris. And I do not say that in any way kindly, but Ryan is certifiable. Eamon Ryan needs a chaperone. Like, Eamon Ryan is caring the community. You know, openly and obviously, Ryan's gaga. Eamon Ryan is. Gaga. We are now importing peat from Latvia, this country, because we've stopped harvesting it and are, you know, whatever. One of the signs, and this goes back many, many centuries, one of the signs of a society that is collapsing is excessive taxation that's unfair, while at the same time certain strands of the society are exempt from taxation and are also indulged by the taxes that they screw out of others. That was one of the precise features of pre-revolutionary the final days of pre-revolutionary monarchic France before the first French Revolution, because France had revolutions after revolution after revolution. I mean, France didn't just get rid of the monarchy. They kind of went, you know, they went bald-headed to it. France is not a stable republic in the way Ireland is, or is to date. There, you know, France has had a number of republics. We've only had one that actually testifies to the rigour of our constitution. We are looking at your man, Dan, what's his name, in the state of Victoria. Hang on, I'll pause and look it up. Daniel Andrews, the Premier of the state of Victoria in Australia. And Thomas Sheridan has been going into a lot of excellent detail about him, but there's something I would add to it. Thomas has mentioned this somewhat, but I'd go into further detail. He reminds people of a teacher, yeah. He's certainly, he'd be a mediocre teacher in a mediocre school. He reminds me of specific teachers I worked with when I was a teacher. And, they're foul individuals, in every sense, foul individuals. And I think one of the reasons why there's so much visceral hostility towards Andrews is because he reminds people of teachers who he disliked. I remember a teacher in my own secondary school who I disliked viscerally. And we dislike them viscerally. It is visceral. And Andrews, I think, has triggered that in a lot of people. School leaves huge psychological marks on people, either for good or for bad, or both. They're not mutually exclusive. And it stays with us. We take it to the grave in many instances. And Andrews is one of those. He has, in my opinion, awoken something in people who remember prick teachers who they really disliked. And these prick teachers are teachers who have no life or identity or authority or purpose outside of their job in a school. And they invoke authority, the board of management. We will refer it to, I'll lift the phone and ring your parents. And yet they're very heavily involved in the school. They do all kinds of shit in the school, activities and all that kind of thing. But everybody still fucking hates them. They can probably control the class because they're in the school donkey's years. But they're not a teacher who you'd remember as inspirational. I remember the school principal taught us Irish for 5th and 6th year, and I practically remember everything in the class. And he was just the school principal. He wasn't, he was married and had kids and did other shit. I think he was into horse racing as well. And he, though, I took, when I was a teacher myself, I would, if I met that man, I wouldn't go out of my way to meet him. But if I met this school principal who taught me Irish in 5th and 6th year, I would tell him that I took so much from his teaching methods. Where that other teacher in school, I took so much from his teaching methods in the opposite. So in other words, you'd say to yourself, what would Mr. XYZ do? And you do the opposite of what Mr. XYZ would do, and you're never known to fail. Lasted me through 11 years of secondary teaching. I suspect that I became a secondary teacher, seriously now, I make this next remark earnestly, I suspect that it is an act of self-therapy. If so, it is a very positive thing to do. Other people resort to drugs and drink, violence and abuse. I became a secondary teacher. And in a way, I suppose it was trying to prove, in general, that I was good enough. And then you realise when you reach this age now, I'm 48 now, you realise you don't have to prove yourself to anyone, do you? But how long does it take us to know that? How long does the conditioning kick in? I remember when I would go on holidays to Bundoran particularly, you'd see tour groups who'd come. American families would come to Bundoran. You'd be awfully fond of Americans. But they have to have an itinerary. When I go to Mulranny I go to Mulranny on my own. I sometimes go to Bundoran on my own. And I remember thinking of something in my 20s. An acquaintance of mine was in university at the time training to be a dentist. And he and some of the rest of them booked a holiday in Switzerland, I think, for a week. And one of the lads, when he arrived in Switzerland, went to bed in the hotel for about 2 days. He was so exhausted. Now, this is the American tourist thing. They have to have an itinerary and go and look at this and look at that. The Germans are worse. I remember having breakfast in the hotel in Bundoran, and there was a tour of Germans. And I was chatting to some of them. Germans get on with Irish people in their Germanic way. The Swiss don't, you see. The Swiss don't. The French do in a French way. The Brits do in a Brit way. But the Germans like the Irish, believe it or not. We infuriate them in many regards, but they do like the Irish, and we kind of like them. And I remember chatting to the Germans, we have to go now. The tour bus is waiting. Okay, I said, you have a lovely day. You're at home. And they went off, and by instinct, they all went to the reception of the hotel, and every one of them got a map of County Donegal, which is, it's one of these peel and stick things. The hotel has these things they've had printed with a map of Donegal and South Donegal in particular. And they would peel one off, every one of the Germans peeled one off and stood in a queue at the bus. So if they weren't told to queue, they did it by instinct. And if they weren't given a rule book, they made one up. I said to myself, we sat, myself and some of the Irish people, it's a lot of Northern Irish people go to that particular hotel, and there's a very big dining room. And the breakfast is great, actually. It's one of the biggest hotel dining rooms stroke restaurants in Ireland. It could seat about 200 people. And we were sitting at the front, looking out at the Germans in a straight line at their tour bus, the door of which had not yet opened, of course. And they had on all their sensible gear, because it was Bundoran in January and it was pissing rain. Bundoran's the only place I know where I stepped out the front door of the hotel. It's like stepping under a tap. When it rains, and by goodness it rains in Bundoran. It rains. But there they were, queuing up in a straight line at the tour bus. We were all roaring laughing back in the restaurant as we were finishing our breakfast. What did I do that day? I don't particularly remember precisely what I did that morning, but I would hazard a guess I probably went back to bed after breakfast. When I go on hotel breaks, for me, I have a strict schedule in the hotel breaks: dinner and breakfast. Dinner as late as possible, and actually usually breakfast as early as possible. Other than that, everything is negotiable, and I do that deliberately, and I don't apologise for it. Our social conditioning would make us guilty for that. No, you shouldn't be. You go to a hotel to do what you want to do. You're on your holiday to do what you want to do. Some people want to ski, some people want to do activities, and that's valid. When I go on a holiday, I like to go to a hotel that has a really good weights room and gym, and I like to go to a hotel that has a swimming pool, sauna, and steam room, and that's for, achy muscles, that kind of thing. What time do I go down to the gym at? When I feel like it. What time do I do the sauna, the jacuzzi, the swimming pool? When I feel like it. So the only two strict appointments I have when I go to a hotel is breakfast and dinner, and that's good enough. And there are certain days you'd wake up and, you'd have breakfast and you're just knackered, and, you'd say, will I go to the gym? No, I think I'll go back to bed. And many's the time, I'd say, I'm going back to bed, I'm switching off the alarm, and I'll get up when I get up. And I come away from those hotel breaks feeling really, really good and relaxed and unburnt out and unfatigued. And that's what you pay the money for, or at least that's what I pay the money for. That's what I pay the money for. Many years ago I went to London, and I came back and I was chatting to somebody in the bank around Sutton. I said, I have just come back from London. And a very genteel old woman says to me, she said, were you over for Wimbledon? No, I said, I was over meeting some gay friends and we went gay cruising in Soho. Oh, she said. She looked at me, she said, any success? Oh, I said, I haven't recovered yet. Oh, she said, I have to come in your next trip. So people, never, don't always judge a book by its cover. I'd still remember that. I think her attitude was, you're a young gay man, you've gone off to Soho to get your whole, it's all adults, it's all gay bars in Soho, fucking go for it. Women can be funny that way. Women, understand. They don't do the machismo, you're gay, I'm a woman, I don't care if I'm 70, 75. Some of those older, very grand, genteel ladies would have a lot of queer friends as well. This is before the trannies came along to shit in the cornflakes the way they've done to everything, particularly this year. I remember it was the year 2000, and even then, those kind of genteel, older women, they're surprisingly unshockable. I do remember that one, though. So, you go on your holidays for different reasons. I would go, when I came out in 1999, I was 25, which was quite, these days they're all coming out at 18, but I came out quite late at 25, and I was frightened, and there'd been a lot of homophobia in my secondary school, which still has it. It's rampant with homophobia. They pretend it isn't, but it is. And, I then started going to London a lot, because I could get laid in London, and you're over from Ireland, you meet some London guy, and he's your own age, or a bit younger, or a bit older, and you have a bit of laugh, and you have sex, and there's no strings attached. You never meet again. That's what it's about, particularly with guys. And I did a lot of that in my first year or two after I came out of the closet, because I was catching up to an extent. I remember reading something that moved me. you know the way gay men, it said, are always behaving like perennial teenagers. Well, that's because they didn't have a proper teenage in the first place. And that's true. We didn't. Certainly I didn't. And we do get put on hold a bit. I thought that was a very, very good insight. You know, the homophobia and the exclusion and the bullying and the jeering and the violence that gay teens put up with, and they still do, by the way. I want to just clarify that they still do. This isn't me in any way buying into the Tenny, you know, transgender victimization line, because they're professional victims and professional grievance mongers. Tenny are. I'm glad to be gay. I don't view being gay as an affliction, but back in those days, particularly in the 80s when I was in school, it was horrible. And you know, you're in denial to yourself. You don't want to be gay. You wish you could fancy girls, and you just don't. But you're at the same time, you are actually one of the boys, believe it or not. I think Irish education has a lot to answer for. I think it has a lot to answer for. If I had children now, I certainly would not put them into any Irish school. Based upon what I experienced over 11 years of secondary teaching and doing a lot of subbing in primary schools as well. But particularly what we've seen in the past year to two, particularly this year, 2021, I wouldn't put a child in an Irish school now. I'd rather, and I mean, at the age of 16, I think I was legal to leave school, and I'm sorry I didn't, because I know myself, I wasn't lazy, I was actually very highly motivated, but I was highly motivated in my own direction. If you look at the Shite Toy Show, I did that myself over 8 months. I didn't do that by accident. And I used it to teach myself various different animating skills, how to do quick animating that you can do in PowerPoint. PowerPoint is just magic for that, because I only realized and discovered how you can save PowerPoint to 4K. Not just to ordinary video, but you can do a 4K video in PowerPoint. So that means that for all intents and purposes, PowerPoint is as good as any animating program that you spend zillions of quid on. PowerPoint is as good as them. And I find PowerPoint easy to use. Why waste money? Why waste your money on Sankey software when you've got PowerPoint? If you want to do that kind of somebody sent me an email there. You want to do that kind of linear, old school type of animation that I like to do. You know, PowerPoint's as good as them all. On PowerPoint, you can import your transparencies from Photoshop. So, you alter the transparency in Photoshop. You look at that particular clip of the kids jumping into the balloon at Gay Byrne on the far right. When the little girl ran over to the balloon, the transparency of her at the balloon changed then as she jumped in, because obviously it had to change so that we could see her getting into the balloon. So I used a different transparency between her beside the balloon and then jumping in, and same with the little boy. So you will change your transparency midway through a clip because, for example, if something is shrinking or something is depleting, if you look, for example, also at Jim Corr playing the piano, I had to move the hands manually, or Sinead O'Connor playing the piano earlier on, I had to move the hands manually to do that. Or actually, that clip at the far right come in the fire escape. Dave Cullen's head peeked out, and I had to create that. That was a special transparency I created just for Dave's head coming in. So, PowerPoint allows you to bring in and import in all of those transparencies. It gives you very clear dimensions, so that when you're doing the next slide, you can make them switch over completely seamlessly. So it's brilliant. It's a magic program, PowerPoint. It's a magic program. We are witnessing a society collapsing. Before the American Revolution, one of the key phrases, and you see, it's stuck in people's heads, and once a phrase sticks in people's heads, then the oppressor's in trouble. No taxation without representation. Before the French Revolution, they didn't have phrases like that. Maybe they did, I don't know. But the issue was that there was excessive taxation of working people. And an aristocracy, a bloated aristocracy, was living, high on the hog on the taxes of these people. When a society is collapsing, it regresses into excessive taxation. it does that not for the money, it does it to oppress. There's been a lot of eyebrows raised this week when documentation was sent out to homeowners saying that there would be a reassessment of residential property tax. And Troker this week said we need to be giving more money away in foreign aid. And Roderick O'Gorman this week said, they're putting in place the structure. His ministry is buying housing for people who've arrived in Ireland so that they're housed within four months, I think it is. Another part of a collapsing society is that the provocations become worse. This is what we're seeing with O'Gorman. That's actually the forecourt to fascism. That's a provocation to say that people who've just arrived in the country, immigrants, will get housed in 4 months. And also, if you look at the white paper on immigration, that they will be encouraged to leave if their application to stay in the country is rejected. In other words, they won't be deported. Don't worry. Don't worry. Mrs. Carmody. Marcia Gay Harden was brilliant as Mrs. Carmody. It was a really... This is, there are a number of things that make a good film. One of the absolute essentials is good dialogue, because you can always spot something that does not have good dialogue. A British comedy called The Likely Lads had diabolical dialogue. Whereas you look at things like, say, Peep Show, really good dialogue. And dialogue, of course, you don't have the good dialogue, forget about it, because you could have the best actors in the world. And if they have crap dialogue, well then, that's it. But another thing you need, even if you have really good dialogue, is you need a good director who will run with accidental things that work. So even when you're doing animation, there'll be things that happen. You say, I've got to leave that in, and it'll work. But another thing, and it's an essential, really it is an essential, is casting. You look at RTE and the drivel they come out with in RTE's latest gritty urban drama. Next you'll be hearing about Amy Huberman's new hilarious sitcom. It's... and the casting on RTE is always so off. It's so off, the casting. Marcia Gay Harden was not the stereotype immediate choice for Mrs. Carmody. She was and remains too fresh-faced and sprightly looking. I think she was in her early 40s when she played the part of Mrs. Carmody, where in Stephen King's not very good short story, The Mist, she was apparently an old woman. So they went for somebody with Marcia Gay Harden, who is obviously not an old woman, yet it worked. Not only did it work, but the picture of Mrs. Carmody with her bonnet holding the basket entering the supermarket has actually become a meme. It's become an icon. And that's because they chose Marcia Gay Harden. It's Marcia Gay Harden's face. It's interesting to read celebrity threads. And have you met celebrities who are nice and celebrities who are not nice? And it's very interesting to read Normie's attitude to celebrities. Marcia Gay Harden is an actress. She's a good actress, I'm sure. That's the only thing I saw her in. Jennifer Lawrence is an actress. And they're just there to do a job and earn money and pay their bills. Now, if you take Lawrence, she earns an awful lot of money. If you take Marcia Gay Harden, Harden won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress on some occasions, so that would have helped pay the bills a bit more. But they're people like you and me. They're actresses who got lucky. And I don't say that to disparage either Jennifer Lawrence or Marcia Gay Harden, but there are a lot of talented people who don't get the breaks. Lawrence and Harden got the breaks. But they're good actresses, obviously. They got the breaks and took advantage of it. You can't get the break here in Ireland. Instead, you have Amy Huberman and Owen McDermott and all of these, Ryan Tubridy and all of the Doireann Garrahy. And it was interesting when Owen McDermott decided to take a rest from his position in RTE. Nobody cared. So we're all told, he's hilarious. Oh yeah, Owen's hilarious. He does the breakfast show with Doireann Garrahy. It would be the same if they got rid of her. There's loyalty to people on telly, and they don't have it. Gay Byrne, I think, was one of and Brendan Grace, and Daniel O'Donnell. Gay and Brendan had TV shows on RTE, and Brendan Grace, and they had a lot of loyalty because they'd oodles of talent, but they were not, Brendan Grace was a very good TV host. So, by the way, is Daniel O'Donnell. People love Daniel O'Donnell. Mary Kennedy in RTE is very good, actually. She presented a Eurovision in 1995, and total natural, and relaxed and friendly, but not over the top. Of course, was Mary Kennedy given the late 8? Of course not. Oh no, we're going to give it to Ryan. Yeah, it's falling apart. So now this letter has gone out to people about evaluation for residential property tax, which is unconstitutional, by the way. Residential property tax. And people are shitting themselves about it and all that, and the assessment of it will be in, it has to be in, and the tone of the letter is offensive as well, actually. It has to be in by November, and it's interesting also to read the letters page in the Irish Times. I'm surprised I got one in. Did you see that one I got in about the NGOs? And Karl Martin from Baldoyle had got one in previously. I'll just read Karl Martin's one out to you. NGO bubble is undermining democracy. Sir, Stephen Collins writes that it's a mystery why Simon Coveney went out of his way to appoint Catherine Zappone, brackets, Zappone obsession deflects attention from bigger issues, opinion and analysis, September the 10th. It's not a mystery at all. Catherine Zappone is an activist closely linked to the burgeoning NGO sector. As happened in the UK under Blair's New Labour, the political class in Ireland is now enthralled to it. Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Labour are especially so. Unfortunately, NGOs tend to be leftist and achingly progressive in outlook. They are not necessarily representative of public opinion. Despite this, their CEOs and spokespeople enjoy unrivalled access to the media, politicians and public servants. They wield huge influence behind the scenes over everything from bicycle lanes to the government's forthcoming hate speech bill. This is incredibly dangerous as it undermines faith in democracy for those of us outside the NGO bubble. Perhaps if Fianna Fáil wants to recover its mojo, it could start by championing a fully inclusive Irish democracy. Party struggles to answer one big question: what makes it different? Pat Leahy, analysis, September 10th. A democracy where free speech and all opinion are valued, not just those of the chattering classes, the NGO industry and the elite media. Yours, etc., Karl Martin, Bayside, Baldoyle, Dublin 13. I'm reading out a letter that was published publicly in the Irish Times, so it's perfectly appropriate to name the person and give the address. I had a letter to similar effect, but in one sentence, about a week later, saying if the government wants to start looking at spending, well, the first thing it needs to look at is $5 billion a year in the NGO industry. Why did the Irish Times print those two letters out of the good of their heart? No. They printed them for a specific reason. Because Tenny, an NGO, which has issues regarding its accounting, has been badgering and witch hunting the Irish Times over the fact that the Irish Times is not accepting Tenny's ideological line. So, TLDR, Tenny wants to dictate the editorial policy of the Irish Times. I got an article today from John Waters Unchained. I'm a subscriber because I want to help John and Gemma make a bit of money to pay the costs of their litigation. Oh, but they didn't choose lawyers. No, they didn't choose lawyers, but they got hit with a whopping bill of costs for the state, and I can assure you that the state will go after them for that. The way that costs in the High Court, Court of Appeal and Supreme Court work is that once an order is made against you and the person who has the order decides to enforce it, they may decide not to go after you. McDonald's never went after me, by the way. And I lost twice. I lost in the Circuit Court and I lost in the High Court. The judge in the High Court wrote a very fair ruling, and I thanked him for it. But it's interesting. My McDonald's case is an interesting piece of jurisprudence in the matter of the 2009 Defamation Act. What it says, the judge doesn't actually come to this finding, but I joined the dots, that you can no longer win a defamation action. That's what I drew from it. But, yeah, I am a subscriber to John Waters Unchained, just to give him a few quid. That's it. If you want to help John Waters financially, subscribe to his blog, John Waters Unchained. It's really good. It's really John Waters. So in other words, he doesn't use one word, we can use 93. But it's, you know, hey, it's good anyway. You know, and I was reading it today, and I forget what I was going to say, but I found it really good. I've been reading it for a while. Oh yeah, he was talking about John McGurk and Gript. Now, I suspect there may be a healthy degree of dissent in opinion between John McGurk and John Waters, although John can speak for himself. There's a healthy dissent in opinion between John Waters and me. You know, I don't agree with John on everything. I don't agree with Gemma on everything. Or rather, I don't agree with Gemma on most things. But having said that, look, they're doing what they're doing. And what I'd say to John Waters is McGurk is doing what he's doing, because whether or not what John Waters says about McGurk is accurate or is worth condemning him for, objectively, Gript.ie has been one of the first online blogs to come out with consistent examination and criticism of the NGO industry. All right, so if John Waters is listening to me now, I would say that to him. Look, I take the good in everything that you can find. All right, I accept that John made those criticisms in good faith, but Gript is talking about the NGO sector and the NGO racket. The NGOs in Ireland are the worst racket in the history of the state. I do not say that lightly. They are a worse racket than the banks. They're a worse racket than anything we have seen in this state is the NGOs. I would go as far as to say that at least some of them could be involved in active money laundering. I won't name names. But the fact now that Karl Martin got that letter in the Irish Times and then I got that letter in the Irish Times about a week later shows that the psychopaths in the NGO lobby have gone the whole Dan Andrews. They've gone too far. It also is immoral for the Irish Times. When you're dealing with totalitarianism, you tolerate not the first millimetre of it. Okay, right, but I haven't gone to court, you'll say. Why have I not gone to court? Easy, because I haven't suffered. Because I'm not telling you about all the litigation I bring or have brought. If anything damages my personal interests, I'm into court almost literally the next day. But has the lockdown and the COVID-19 bullshit, has that in any way actually damaged me? No, why not? Because I haven't been forced to wear a mask. There's your answer. I haven't been forced to wear a mask. You know, I've gone to the shops and the golf club people and arsehole men from the yacht club. You know, I remember this old prick standing behind me in the queue. He was pointing at his mask and pointing at me. I'll fucking cut your fingers off, you baldy old cunt. I didn't say that to him. I just said to him, who are you? You know, when he started getting abusive, so I had to threaten to have him arrested. But then another person in December of last year called the guards on me for not wearing a mask. The guards came down, the establishment had permission to be on the premises without a mask. So the guards were clear about the fact that if I had permission to be on the premises without a mask, then there was no criminal charge for them to answer. The two Gardaí knew me. They said, Christian, we're very sorry. No, I said, it's Mr. XYZ who should be very sorry. I said, he should be apologising to you for wasting your time. I said, I just sat here and drank a cup of coffee. No, I said, you don't have to apologise to me, but thank you. They said, you didn't even have to stay. Oh, no, I said, I thought I'd stay for the fun. And they laughed. Anyway, I said, can we establish now that I'm free to go? No, they said, you were always free to go. Thank you. And then they went to your man and said, you leave the premises now. But no, you're coming with us. They said, it's time for you to go now. And they eventually charged him for wasting Garda time, because it turned out that the manager of the shop had told the complainant that I'd permission to be there without a mask, and he still insisted on calling the guard, so he wasted their time. So, to cut a long story short, can I make an argument? Can I raise an argument that the lockdown has oppressed me in any way? No, I can't raise any argument like that, so I can't go to court. I can continue to do my videos like this, and I can continue to do my most recent video from the 21st of September, in which I described what I believe was an effort to abuse the Gardaí again in that totalitarian way. I explained that the Garda, who I named in my previous video, was embarrassed. He wasn't interested in this. But you don't know, is the next one going to be a fanatic? That's the problem. What's frightening isn't the conduct of that poor guard who was embarrassed who called to my house the other day. I gave him a walk around the garden and showed him all the improvements, and we did chat. He knows me, the guard does. You know, most of the regular guards in Howth know me just from seeing me around the area, and I'd, you know, be out in the road and crowds at the beach and so on. You know, what was chilling was that this framework, this procedure exists, this potential to trouble people exists. He didn't want to trouble me. I said, come in and talk to Mum. Oh, no, I don't want to disturb her. No, I said, I think you should. And I mean, I said it to him very politely. I wasn't being snotty with him, but I said, no, I think you should. And the reason why I wanted him to do that was to see that there was no duress and that I'd nothing to hide. Now, he wasn't accusing me of otherwise, but I still wanted to do that. I was reading today. I was reading. I have to confess, guys, sorry, I still do get the Irish Times. Now, I get it for Dad and Mum, but there are some parts of the Irish Times that I still read. Sorry, I have to come to there. After a year and a half, there's a confession. I still read the letters page. But there's another part of the Irish Times that I won't miss, and that's Ross O'Carroll Kelly. And if you grew up in Ireland in the 80s, particularly during the Roddy Doyle boom, when he was coming, so you look back at so much of Roddy Doyle stuff, and so much of it was shite and patronising of working class people. What did we say? What has Thomas Sheridan said? The woke hate the working class. So they misappropriate them and they distort and they stereotype working class life. I am from a working class background on both sides of my parents, first generation. My mother and father grew up in Kimmage, in the corporation estate in Kimmage. Their parents, my grandparents who would now be 120 years old or thereabouts, their parents were the first tenants of those Dublin corporation houses. The people who moved to those Dublin... I mean, that thing, Varadkar, it says, you know, free housing. And it gets away with it. That beast gets away with saying those things. That gowl gets away with saying these things. My grandparents paid rent. They paid a fixed rent to Dublin Corporation for those houses. Many of the people who moved to those houses moved from appalling slums. Dublin, up to the establishment of independence, had appalling slums. We forget about this now. And I say appalling slums, I mean easily among the worst, most depraved slums anywhere in the world. The Monto was an example. Limerick had slums. Galway had slums. So the people who moved to those corporation houses, including my parents, and I just want to emphasise, my father was born in the in Guinness Buildings on Cuff Street. Mum was born in the country. So they weren't from slum stock, they were from working class stock, but not slum stock. Mum's family were middle class Catholics in Ulster, and the foundation of Northern Ireland in particular was not something that they would commemorate well, shall we say. So they suddenly found themselves getting itchy feet for the south. Dad's family were Dubs, were real Jackeens, Dad's family were. But they, you know, Dad's family didn't come from the likes of the Monto. They came from the Ivy Buildings. And those corporation houses were good houses, and the people who moved into them greatly appreciated what they were getting. My mother describes her childhood in Kimmage, and she says it wasn't wealthy, but it was ferociously respectable. So when you hear people talk about, oh, it was no holds barred, I remember one cunt wrote an article, or, you know, a no holds barred area like Kimmage. My mother was angry at that and offended. Actually, so was I, and sure, I never lived in Kimmage. You know, it was not a no holds barred area. It was predominantly Catholic. They were all families, and they were ferociously respectable. Anybody who's grown up in a settled Dublin corporation estate will absolutely 100% agree with what I'm saying there. There is a ferocious respectability to those kind of Dublin corporation estates, and the women and the grannies, you know, and they're a community, and the people fight, and the people don't get on with everybody, and they're people, and, you know, I don't get on with everybody in the community I live in Howth. Oh, Howth, la-di-da, and we bathe in pink champagne, and we have an orchestra playing in the garden. Well, maybe we do, but, you know, the other people can't afford it. But, You know, people have this stereotypical notion of hope, but what it has in common with Kimmage or Kulak or whoever, Moy Ross, is that there's good and bad. I'm talking, it's bloody fucking obvious, really, if you're sentient, you're listening to my shit, you'll agree with me here. You know, who live in who, thought it all. No, you know, fuck off. I would like to thank the person who sent me via Facebook Messenger a particular clip last night. I'm going to let you go with that shortly. It's only 4 minutes. I make no claims in relation to the clip, and when I hear the term natural doctor, I go, because I am sceptical about things like homeopathy. I'm very sceptical in homeopathy. I'm very sceptical in angel therapy. You know, I'm conventional regarding medicine, but up to a point. I've been vaccinated, but up to a point. I support vaccinations, but up to a point. I know something. George Carlin said this. 2 facts. 1, the government is lying. 2, if in doubt, look at 1. Yeah. And what we can see all around us is that the government is lying. Eamon Ryan, that eye-swivelling, lunatic, batshit crazy cretin going out to talk to the kids. Hey, we're listening to the kids. No, that's the way Ryan speaks. Well, I went out to listen to the kids. That actually is the way Ryan speaks. You know? We're fighting for climate change. That's the way those kids speak. You know, well... Okay. You know, what did I say in previous videos? What has Thomas said? Everything's standing still, isn't it? Okay, they're talking about more property tax. Okay, they're talking about hate speech rules so that you can't say that a mentally ill man who's had his dick and balls cut off is a mentally ill man who's had his dick and balls cut off. But frankly, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to keep saying it. Right? And they can block me on Twitter. Some of them are so rancid, those trends. They're absolutely foul. You can smell them from here, can't you? Ugh. But, you know, don't imagine that we're being affected by this. We're not. We're not being affected by this. It's okay. It's all like The Mist. And it was Thomas Sheridan who got me. You know, when Thomas Sheridan recommends a film, I say, oh, that's it. I've got to go and watch that now, haven't I? Because he always recommends really good films, Thomas Sheridan does. He's great taste in cinema. He and I have almost identical taste in cinema. John Carpenter did a film, 1979-1980, The Fog. I believe that The Fog is one of the greatest films ever made. Now, that's subjective, but I think it's one of the greatest pieces of cinema made in the world. I would go as far as to say one of the greatest in world cinema history. You don't know you're making a masterpiece until it's done. But The Fog is a masterpiece. In The Fog, there's a woman, here are the spoiler alerts, there's a woman who owns a lighthouse, which is also a radio station. Now, it would have been, I think, long wave or medium wave. In those days, they didn't have FM. And it was a beautifully evocative film, this fishing village in California. And it was a nice depiction of California, coastal California, not LA, not San Francisco. California is a very big state. California is as big as Germany. It's a big place, California. There's a lot to California, you know. It looks like a very beautiful state in many regards. And a fog descends on the village, and it was like The Mist, and I would be willing to believe that the director of The Mist took a lot, or even Stephen King, when he wrote the story, took inspiration from John Carpenter's The Fog. In fact, I would almost assume it. Because what both The Mist and The Fog had in common was that there was something in it. There's something in the fog. The woman, she ended up in her lighthouse. The fog came and cut off all the electricity. Now, in the village, they weren't on the national or state grid. They had a generating station nearby, which did the village, I think. The fog came and cut it all off. So she found suddenly in her lighthouse that she couldn't do radio broadcasts. All the electricity went out, so she ran down to the basement and switched on a generator. The generator was enough to do the broadcast and to do a little light. Suddenly she found, because she was able to keep the electricity going, listen carefully, listen carefully, listen carefully, because she could keep the electricity going, she saved the whole place. All right, and I won't say too much more on that particular point. But one of the things she was saying was keep away from the fog. Suddenly all the villagers who had battery radios in the car or in the house, they had all the radios switched on, they were listening to her. She was saying the fog is advancing up such and such a street. The fog is coming across the beach here. Keep away from the fog, she was saying. There's something in the fog. And there was something in the mist as well, in the Stephen King adaptation film from 2006. And more in the mist than the fog, there is the perception that what was in the mist was relying in a Jungian sense on people's fears, because Mrs. Carmody was not attacked. Remember that. She was not attacked. The insects stood up in front of her and she stood in front of them and she eyeballed them. And they fucked off and left her alone. I found that for me, Marcia Gay Harden has been interviewed, but nobody has interviewed her in that one particular clip where the insect stands in front, or the insect descends in front of her and she stares at it. And actually she eyeballs the insect out of it. And what I saw, and Harden got it very, very well. Harden captured, she was very good in that film, Marcia Gay Harden. Brilliant casting, an inspirational, off-the-wall, different type of casting. And that's how it's brilliant. And they'll never do that in Ireland because they're blades. The notion of thinking out of the box and saying, we'll give the part to a totally different type of person here. Nah, we'll give it to Duran and Owen. Or some other fucking loser in Montrose. But Marcia, she wasn't the obvious choice to play Mrs. Carmody, but she was an absolutely inspired choice, and she has become an icon. There was something in the mist, there was something in the fog. And there's something out there now, folks. There's something out there. And I'll tell you what it preys on. Because it does, it's a predator, what's out there. Do we know what it is? No. Do we know who has sent it? No. Can we find out? Probably not. Should we bother? No. What it preys on is only one thing, folks. It preys on only one thing. It preys on our fears. Or rather your fears, because I don't have any. I'll be okay. I was annoyed. I've been annoyed at many things I've witnessed, but that's since kind of about 2008 I've been annoyed at many things I've witnessed. So this is nothing new. To that extent, I was ahead of everybody. Being ahead of the time is a very lonely place. But then if you were able to stick around, as the Chinese saying goes, one of the secrets of life is to stand beside the river long enough to watch your enemies float down. And that's what's happening. I was right all along. And John Waters talks about destiny, a perception on his part that maybe we were supposed to be the people for this precise time. Yes, and that's not messianic. That's not David Icke saying, hey, I'm son of God. We're all the son of the gods from a pagan point of view, and nobody's the son of the god. If you're a pagan, you don't believe in the Messiah. Hello, there's no Messiah. Neither me, nor you, nor anyone. And Jesus wasn't the Messiah anyway. He was probably just a rabbi with schizophrenia. He ran a cult. Jesus ran a cult. He was a cult leader. Jesus, he was this Jewish cult leader. He got lucky, though, because his image kind of caught on. He was a cult leader that seemed to have a decent brand. Well, he sure fucking did by the looks of it, didn't he? But, there's no Messiah. But John Waters talks about a sense of destiny, and I know exactly what he means, and he's not Lula to say that. That's not cuckoo. A sense that we are the ones who are ready for this. And we were. We were ready for this, and I am ready for this. And what the mist was about was that these normies and these NPCs in the supermarket were the ones that the insects preyed upon. Mrs. Carmody was killed. She died. But she was not killed by the insects. She was killed by the normies, wasn't she, and the NPCs. And they didn't have the sense to see that Mrs. Carmody had got together this group. In other words, she was a natural leader and she had a charisma. She was like Trump. She was like Trump. But there is something out there. And don't try to do what they did in The Mist. They tried to take it on and they tried to do all this and that and all that. And they all ended up either getting killed or killing their families or that kind of thing. I told you there's going to be plot spoilers. You were warned. You have to stand back. You have to stand back. How do you deal with the sickness of a totalitarian society? How do you deal with the sickness of a totalitarian society? You do your best to ignore it. They hate these psychopaths, these Dan Andrews and Varadkar and Eamon Ryan and these fucking filthy vermin. They hate being ignored. Yes, Thomas Sheridan is right about something. You have got to stop calling politicians by their first names. Hey Leo, give us a break. What would happen at these peaceful protests of people had a sign that said, fuck you, Varadkar, you cone-headed autist? How about that? But everything that John and Gemma and David Icke and so many of us tinfoil hatters have been coming out with, practically, if not all, of what we've come out with has materialised, hasn't it? Wouldn't it have been so much nicer and more comforting if we'd been wrong? Wouldn't it? So, those of us out there have had an insight into what's coming. History does not stop. Societies collapse, it happens. And when societies collapse, then you see who's able and who's not. Think of the lighthouse keeper who had the electricity. Think of that. And I suppose a gaslight has been the notion that history has ended. That was a deliberate gaslight, by the way. Deliberate. There is something out there. It's bigger than any one of us. And the decisions, I've said this before, are not being made in Ireland. So you look at Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar and Stephen Donnelly and Simon Harris, and even your man Dan, what's his name? I keep forgetting the cunt's name in Victoria in Australia. They're all pawns in this. Eamon Ryan and those ones. They're all pawns. Dan Andrews. They're all pawns in this. You know, don't be a pawn. Stand back. Bertie Ahern stood back. Brian Cowan stood back for his sins. Mary Coughlin for her sins. They all stood back. The shrewd ones got out. They got away. And they were right. They were right, because there will be... I believe that at some point in the future there will be massive, massive recrimination for what's happened. But not for so much for what's happened, but for what is coming. I taught myself tonight, going into the developer tools in Facebook Messenger, how to download a message sent to me via Facebook Messenger. Now, I mean, what you can do is you can play back a message sent to you. I mean, a voice message. You can play it back using a microphone and re-recording it, but the sound quality isn't good. But I learned tonight how to actually download the particular piece of code that you've been sent, because everything's code. The piece of code that you've been... Facebook don't make it easy to download messages on Facebook Messenger, so you have to go into SYS to do it, you know, and I did it. And I did it because I want you to listen to the message that somebody else, a very good friend, a very loyal, nice man who's been such support to me, because, you know, we come out with the Shite Toy Show and we come out with our stuff online, but we do all have our moments where we're weak. We do all have our moments when, you know, we may have the veneer that we put out online, but it isn't always easy. And to have a friend who you can cry to, literally on the phone, and talk to and deal with, it's very valuable. And that is a friend, and he knows who he is. And I hope he's listening. And, you know, he sent me this particular clip that I'm going to play for you now. And I must sound terribly emotional tonight. I'm sorry, I sound like an old woman. Maybe, you know, the Tenny thing is right. Maybe I'm having the menopause. I'm 48 now. A bit late for the menopause, haven't I? But I am a bit kind of emotional tonight. And he sent me a sound clip, which was forwarded to him. I presume it's been forwarded many places before. And I managed to download it, and I've downloaded it as its own MP4. So I believe that it is not entirely an exaggeration to say that what we are witnessing is murder on a wholesale basis. I don't care what I've done with my life, because I did do one thing. And I can take this to the grave with me, what I did do. I saved the life of a 91-year-old couple. My parents. I saved their lives. Maybe John Waters is right. I was sent along at this time to be there for them. Maybe he's right. Because he's right. John is right. There is a sense of destiny, isn't there? There is a sense that we were sent along right now to do what we're doing right now. You know, even the silly videos, the Shite Shite Toy Show and all that. You know, keeping people laughing and keeping people provoked. But, you know, I think of an ad on telly. A woman comes home from being on a holiday and she had a son who was about 19, and she walked in and looked at the house and she said, I want to be wrong. And it was a good ad, actually. The Brits do really good ads sometimes. The Irish ads aren't, for the most part, a pile of horse manure, like everything else in popular mainstream media here. You know, because the Irish mainstream media insult the intelligence of their recipients from the start to the finish. We have the politicians in the mainstream media that we tolerate. I want to make that clear to you. Eamon Ryan is tolerated. What? Thomas Sheridan, you did a really good interview during the week with two other Irish guys. Never heard of them before. I'd love to do an interview with them. And he was trying to say, what is it with the Irish people? And you see, this is why I'm happy to see immigrants. Because immigrants, whether we like it or not, in the crudest of way, immigrants aren't part of the RTE Montrose, Ray and Mora in Templeogue, Rathfarnham groupthink. They're new blood coming into the country. The Eastern Europeans, even the Africans, even the Afghans. You know, we have to deal with this. And I've reached my own analysis. Why are the Irish such goddamn fucking sheep? Because the other night a man came out to my house to collect something. And, you know, he said there's going to be another lockdown. He said, and people aren't going to tolerate it. This particular man had not been needle crafted. And he was refusing to wear a mask. I said, hey, brother, you want a cup of tea or coffee? And he didn't take one. He was in a rush. But we were chatting. And, you know, he said, you know, there's going to be another lockdown after November or October. He said, this is all bullshit about lifting the restrictions. Yeah, brother, you're right. I said, yeah. You know, he said, they're going to lift the restrictions, then they're going to blame all of us, you know, and And he said, the Irish people won't stand for another lockdown. No, sorry, Eamon, I said. The Irish people will stand for another lockdown because they're sheep. And I told him about the interview I'd listened to with Thomas Sheridan and those two other Irish lads. And I've come to my own conclusion that the Irish people have had it too easy for too long. Because when you begin to get really hungry, when you begin to worry about keeping the lights and the heating on, when you begin to worry about the food, when you begin to worry about having a roof over your head, then you become less complacent. And I do believe that there's an element in Ireland who are just too bloody complacent at the moment because they haven't had it hard enough. My parents did have it hard. A lot of people had it harder than my mother and father, but they had it hard. I know what it's like myself. This may be going to create gales of laughter here. I've never had to worry, of course, about things like clothes or food or a roof over my head. But I know what it's like to have to fight for something. To be motivated to get something and some other fucker's trying to take it from you and you're going to get it anyway. I know what it's like to have to fight for something. I do know that. You may not believe me, but I do know what it's like when every fibre of your soul is going to fucking fight for something. And I think the vast majority of those people who still buy the RTE line and the Irish Times line, I say that not as unkindly about the Irish Times as I do about RTE. RTE's promotion of Eamon Ryan's stunt was an absolute disgrace. It was, as I said to many people, a new low even for RTE. A lot of those ones who you meet up in Howth, the cyclists and the yummy mummies and the jeeps, the Chelsea tractors and all that, they don't know what it's like to have to fight. Well, I think they soon will know what it's like to have to fight. But it may be too late. It may be too late for them. I think it will. Your man who called out to me was saying, you know, look at Australia and those camps, those quarantine camps. You know, he said they're putting in those quarantine camps now, he said, and they're going to be rounding up and locking up the unvaccinated. I said, you're almost right. Almost, yeah. I said take away the word on.
Okay, so I am a natural doctor, and I have 1,600 patients. Many are vaccinated. Just to give you a little bit of backstory about my credibility, what I've seen so far and what I've learned is all information from physicians, medical physicians, natural physicians, and also immunization of virology doctors, things like that. And then also nurses. So what I'm about to share with you is the first vaccine, the second vaccine, and then the boosters and what it does to your body. The first vaccine, as it goes into your body, it has a small amount of saline and then a bunch of ingredients that are very catastrophic to your cellular system. What that does to your immune system, which is your bone marrow, your thymus gland, your spleen, and all other systems associated with your immune system, it decreases the ability to produce white blood cells by 50% from your first vaccine. Then 8 weeks later, which is white blood cell reproductive system, so your ability to make another generation of white blood cells is 8 weeks. That's why they set it up 8 weeks later, to hit it again. So you hit the white blood cell ability while it's down. So now what you do is now they decrease the saline in the second one, and they increase the harmful ingredients. So now you have a shift in the ingredients. So they decrease the saline and increase. So now there's a shift. And then what they do is that second dose attacks your ability to make white blood cells by an additional 25%. So now you only have a white blood cell ability, like the ability to make white blood cells functioning at 25%. So you just wiped out 75% of your military and the ability to make that military. Then what they do is they set in the booster. The booster has 81 strands of foreign bacteria that your cells have never come across. So you don't have the antibodies to fight it, but you only have 25% of your white blood cell production to be able to fight it. So it's a losing battle. So then what starts to happen is you start to get chronic inflammation that goes to the areas that you had predisposition. So if you were someone that has gut health issues, that's your area that it's going to focus on, and you're going to have inflammation in the gut health. If it's respiratory, if you have tumor or cancer, or if you have, say, endometriosis, or you have a skin condition, whatever that is, it's going to inflame that area, because now the body has hit the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight, and the body is in a chronic inflammatory state with a low immunity and a low immune response. Then you get your second booster. What the second booster has is it has 8 strands of HIV. And now what that does is it completely shuts off your ability to make white blood cells. And if you Google what that disease is, it is HIV. So now we have people that are walking around with no immune system, no ability to make an immune system, 81 strands of foreign bacteria, and then also 8 strands of foreign HIV, along with all the other harmful ingredients, and then they remove all the saline from the first and second booster. Now, to make matters worse, during this process, 20 to 30% of the population is going to die every single series of this process. There's 4 series. They have 3 more boosters that are coming out, and the reason why is because once they make you so that your immune system can't make white blood cells anymore, you become dependent on the boosters to survive, just like someone becomes dependent on insulin. Big Pharma is looking for people that either die off to protect our population control, and then those that don't die off, we will have reoccurring customers for life with the boosters, so that they will be able to maintain income and collect the money back from all the funding that they put in to make these vaccines in the first place. So hope that was helpful. I hope that you listen to this properly, and I hope that you take the time to do your own critical thinking and just give it 2 to 3 years. Every single animal that participated in this study for any of these vaccines had a 100% death rate. And I encourage you all to just take a moment, look around you, and just wait it out. And let's just see what let nature take its course, and let's just see what happens. Thank you.